Have you conquered every From Software title, bested the likes of Cuphead, and maybe you want to find a new Mount Everest? Well, there's really no such thing as a title that no one can beat thanks to the collective time and dedication of the game's community, so what does that leave us with? Whilst the following games, largely of the retro variety, might not even be that hard, for one reason or another, nobody has ever finished them. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games nobody has beaten because it's impossible. Number 10, Space Station Silicon Valley. It's worth reiterating up front that there won't be a lot of modern games on this list. While the industry has major issues in the current day with releasing games in broken states, they are at least beatable, and if not, updates and patches make that a reality. This isn't the case with older titles such as 1998 Bizarro platformer Space Station Silicon Valley. Developed by DMA Design, now known as Rockstar North, SSSV is a game with plenty of its own quirks. You control a microchip that can attach itself and take control of a variety of robot animals to complete your goals. However, there's one goal that eludes every player. A trophy that spawns in the level Fat Bear Mountain cannot be picked up no matter what you try. This means you can roll the credits but not officially 100% the title. Daniel Layden, a programmer at DMA Design, apologised for this as recently as 2021 in a YouTube comment of all places, remarking that he tweaked the item's collision elsewhere without thinking of the further consequences. Layden went on to joke that he won DMA's Worst Bug Award for the mistake, which is cute in retrospect. But it must have been pretty mortifying at the time knowing you were the reason N64 players could never reach that coveted 100%. Number 9, Great Curiano ZX Spectrum. Superstar video game programmers are few and far between, but David Perry really made a name for himself in the early 90s. He put his hand to several classics like Earthworm Jim, Cool Spot, and Disney's Aladdin for Mega Drive, formed Shiny Entertainment, and was all around a charismatic individual. However, his name is rather prominently featured in a game that is unfortunate enough to feature in a list like this. The infamous Taito released an arcade fighter called Gladiator and selected the small studio Elite Systems to craft a ZX Spectrum version for gamers at home in 1987. Now renamed to Great Curianos to avoid copyright issue, Perry really struggled to reduce the size of the game down to the much smaller Spectrum cassette. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and Perry decided that the cut would have to include the game's ending. In order to try and save face on this, he made the final boss of the title an invincible skeleton. The programmer has named the game his most hated piece of work, but this is probably little solace to the ZX Spectrum fans who grew up facing down this unscrupulous skeleton and inevitably lost. Number 8, Bubble Bobble Revolution, USA 1 version. It's always sad to think of once arcade classics like Bubble Bobble and how they have not only failed to stay relevant, but had their legacy tarnished. Bubble Bobble Revolution was released for the Nintendo DS and was instantly met with critical revile. Right off the bat, the character art for the box of Bub and Bob and their cold, dead eyes is bad enough, but the game inside was lazy and tired, hardly offering much worthwhile revision. It was additionally a buggy mess of collision issues and even instances where entire levels could randomly be skipped. However, the North American version specifically was much worse. Despite the game having 100 levels in Japan and Europe, the American copy gets as far as level 30 before becoming unplayable. The boss of said stage doesn't spawn, and thus players can't move on. Considering the American version came nearly a full year after the original Japanese release, how does this happen? Codemasters, who published the title in America, apologised and released a fixed version, but the USA 1 version still lurks out there in the depths of eBay, unbeatable and selling for several $100s. So it might be a turd, but now it's a price-fetching collector's item of a turd. Number 7, Dr. Mario, Game Boy. You might be thinking, that can't be right, a game as legendary as Dr. Mario, but yes, in a sense. First of all, it's important to talk about the existence of the arcade kill screen. When classic arcade titles like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong run long enough, they eventually get to a point where the system hits its processing limit. In the former's case, the cap is 255 stages, and when the game tries to load level 256, it instead spawns a garbled mess of graphics. To a degree, this is the end of the game. Since the developers didn't anticipate players getting this far, they never bothered to program a proper ending, and fans tend to celebrate getting so far that the game can't actually run anymore. Dr. Mario is a weird example though, for a few reasons. First of all, the credits do play after beating level 20, but then following this, the game continues use which is unique. However, there is no graphical mess to celebrate when the game finally stops at level 28. The viruses to clear spawn, but Dr. Mario himself is suddenly missing. Well, what happened? Did Dr. Mario spend too much time around infectious diseases and couldn't show up for work one day? Who's going to clean up these viruses? It's a bit of an anticlimax and not much of an ending. Number 6. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, DOS and Amiga. The 1989 NES TMNT game is pretty bloody hard. For most kids growing up with the title, it was realistically a game with just 3 areas that come to a screeching halt when they get to the brutal Hudson River Dam. But this is nothing compared to the DOS and Amiga versions of the game that right away pulls out a trick that stops the drop-kicking, pizza-eating mutant reptiles in their tracks. Across the game's first level, players take their preferred turtle across the streets of New York and into the sewer system. However, there is a particular jump to cross that is actually impossible. No matter what you try, there's not enough room to leap to the next platform thanks to a low ceiling that sends you plummeting into the sewage below. Now, people have beaten this game, and not just with cheats. The European version of Turtles corrects the problem. However, most bizarrely, later reissues of the game in America addressed other things in the code, but not this jump. Keen players weren't to be deterred though. Using hex editing software, it's possible to move your turtle along past the jump, where you will find another impossible leap. Finally, the Shredder figured out how to conquer his foes, and all it took was a few spare bricks and some mortar. Number 5. Smash TV Arcade version 1.0. 1990's Smash TV was an odd sci-fi dystopic top-down shooter. Inspired by the Schwarzenegger film The Running Man, the setting is a futuristic game show where blood sports have become the norm. You, alongside a friend, will fight hordes of enemies to the death. Your prizes vary wildly from cash to toasters, and there's some tempting talk of something called the Pleasure Dome. Supposedly, if you were good enough, this would unlock after beating the final boss. Pretty clear objective, right? Collect enough keys, rack up enough points, and make your way into this promised paradise. However, there's actually no such thing. Despite harping on about it, it's not in the original arcade game because the developers didn't think that players would be good enough to get to the Pleasure Dome. Sure, Smash TV is tough, but they underestimated hardcore gamers that wouldn't back down from a challenge. As such, the 2.0 release of the arcade version, as well as all subsequent home console ports, included the hidden bonus level. Finally, you could surround yourself with a legion of pixelated women. Was it worth it? Number 4. Tales of Eternia PSP. RPGs, by their very nature, can often have some unfortunately unwinnable situations. If you're underleveled or are able to sell key items for some reason, you can find yourself needing to restart your journey to correct these unfortunate mistakes. Tales of Destiny 2 released for the PS1 in 2000 and in 2001 in Japan and America, but Europe didn't see this installment in the series until 2006 when it came to the PSP as Tales of Eternia. This time it was American players who missed out, and they might actually be thankful for it, as the game is remembered by European folks as more of a headache than anything else. When the player gets to the boss summon fight against Volt, the game will freeze. This battle is about halfway through a 40-hour campaign. That's a lot of time wasted. What makes this even tougher is Namco's reprint, which is designed to fix the issue, was made as subtle as possible. You can't tell which version you've bought until you put it into your PSP. The only way to know is that the re-release will force a PSP firmware update to version 2.5. Fans looking to get a replacement copy, if they were unlucky, could wind up with multiple versions of the first pressing of the game, which is totally unbeatable. Number 3. Mario Party 4's Doors of Doom. We're getting really particular with this one, but it's such an incredible example that needs to be included. Most people would assume finishing a Mario Party title would simply include grabbing all the unlockables and perhaps setting some high scores. But in Mario Party 4, it's impossible to actually get to the end of one particular minigame. Doors of Doom is a single-player minigame which is as simple as it gets. The player is presented with 2 doors with a 50% chance of proceeding to the next room and a 50% chance of being stopped by Bowser. There's no one to beat, it's about getting through as many doors as possible, however that 50-50 split gets more tense every time. On the one hand, there's no actual victory, but there is an end point. At 30 doors opened, the next will always be Bowser, a hard-coded limit in the game. However, there's no recording of anyone ever legitimately getting this far. The current world record is a total of 14 doors, not even half. If you want to get mathematical about things, that's where the real juice is. is. Because each room has a 50% chance of success, doing this 30 times makes for astronomical odds. It's calculated that the possibility of getting to the game's hard-coded end is 0.0000009%. That's less than 1 in 1 billion. This isn't a party, this is a nightmare. Number 2, RoboCop, Commodore 64. The 1988 RoboCop multi-format release was immensely popular. In fact, somehow it became the best-selling video game in the United Kingdom of the entire decade. Take that, Mario, Zelda and Pac-Man. As such, gamers who grew up in Britain in the late 80s and early 90s might have a dreamy, far-off look in their eyes when they think of it, unless they own the Commodore 64 version. Level 3 of the game is literally designed to be impossible to beat thanks to the time limit. Old Robo-Rosa simply doesn't move quickly enough to reach the goal. This was imposed by the developers at Ocean for a very specific reason: to hide the truth. See, it is possible to get through level 3 by repeatedly crouching next to a specific wall and pushing yourself through it. On the other side, level 4 begins, which is a mess of tiles and sprites, completely unfinished and unplayable. That's why the time limit is so strict. This is the worst example of a studio putting a band-aid over a broken bone, or perhaps more fittingly a stop sign just an inch from a brick wall. RoboCop is broken, so let's just make it harder than it is so people give up. Awful, awful stuff. And number 1, Action 52 and the Cheetah Men series. Where there's a money-making industry, there will be those looking to exploit it. Legally dubious plug-and-play systems and homebrew multi-cart releases get by on the promise of games just like the ones you love, or in the case of Action 52, having a buttload of content. After all, NES cartridges were quite small storage-wise, so including 52 in one is mind-bending. Of course, this was a major selling point. My parents would only have to buy me one gift, little Jimmy would exclaim in 1991, and I'd have 52 new games to play. Well, little hypothetical Jimmy, be careful what you wish for. Not only would completing Action 52's contents be a slog because of most of the games being unquestionably awful, it is outright impossible because of how equally broken they are. The game's so-called feature title, Cheetah Men, is the most notable example. Not only is it terrible, it features a game-breaking bug where you can become trapped and are forced to use all of your lives to start from scratch. To cap it all off, there somehow also exists a sequel. The 15,000 copies of Cheetah Men 2 that were produced and left in a warehouse eventually found themselves out in the wild. Clearly unfinished, which begs the question of why it was even put on a cartridge in the first place, Cheetah Men 2 cannot be beaten as it stops progressing after level 6 of 10. The Cheetah Men are the mascots for the bad, the broken, and the unbeatable. Most of these unbeatable games are the result of weird development stories, and if you'd like to hear more development stories, why not check out this video on screen now for 10 video game risks that actually paid off for a more positive slant. Don't forget to leave a comment down below on other games that you know about that can't actually physically be beaten, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. You can follow me on Twitter at Cyniac_123. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.